Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you so much for joining me as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for the worlds that Obsidian has created for us. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 in the game of Avowed. If you're wondering why all those games are paired together, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. And so, as we often do in the show, we dive into the worlds of these games to appreciate the writing that Obsidian has done to create these worlds for us, and we just look into the lore of these worlds, develop roleplays for characters, and just explore the different meanings of the things that are in there. If you're new to the podcast, welcome to the show. Really happy to have you here. I'll signpost you towards episode 0, where I signpost you further towards more foundational lore for this world if you want to just understand the basics. But today is a good episode to start off with as well. In today's episode, I'm going to be telling you why you're playing Path of the Damned wrong. For those unfamiliar, Path of the Damned is a difficulty level that you can play in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 or Avowed. Now, I'm specifically going to gear a lot of this episode towards you're playing Path of the Damned on Avowed incorrectly. However, it could also be said that you're probably playing Path of the Damned wrong on Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, although I can't say that for sure because I think most people are playing Path of the Damned on Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 in such a wide variety that you're probably going to cover what I'm saying today. But regardless, when I say you're playing Path of the Damned wrong, do I mean that you are building the wrong character, that you are not developing the greatest build that you can take on this great challenge with? No, I am not talking about how you can min-max your character to have the absolute best weapons and stats to defeat your enemies in one hit. I'm talking about world-accurate, lore-accurate role-playing within these games. That is what I am talking about. And the reason you're playing Path of the Damned wrong is because you're not playing as a Magranite worshiper. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that in a second. As far as news goes, there's nothing really new to talk about. There's a lot going on with Obsidian, what with updates coming into Grounded 2, which I have been thoroughly enjoying. And there's a big update coming down the road. Looking forward to riding on ladybugs as a buggy. There's a giant tarantula boss coming up as well. So that's a lot of fun. And the marketing for The Outer Worlds 2 continues to go hard. I'm looking forward very much to that game, The Outer Worlds 2. So much so, in fact, that I have this new tabletop RPG that I bought on a whim called Offworlders, and I was thinking of trying to hack that into some sort of Outer Worldsy flavor of RPG. But outside of that, there's not really a lot of news for Pillars or Avowed. People are just still playing the game. We're looking forward to the update for Avowed later this year, which will, for like me anyways, introduce New Game Plus, which is what I'm looking forward to the most out of all of it, as well as a new weapon. So I'm looking forward to a completely brand new playthrough, trying up all the new things that I haven't experienced within the game yet. And I really have this idea of like playing Avowed over and over on New Game Plus before I can like upgrade every single piece of unique armor to its max, so I can always have a role-played character from the start of the game to the end of the game, which is something I really am looking forward to. I don't like that you have to play through a lot of the game just to get to Galawain's Tusks to finally get the armor that you want for the roleplay, but I get it. That's just how it is. But anyways, with that, let's dive into today's episode. We're going to talk about what it means to be a Magranite, a person who worships the god Magran within this world, and why it's appropriate for playing that kind of character in Path of the Damned.
Half the locals would arrest you for trespassing and the rest would kill you outright. I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
Alright, so for those not familiar with who Magran even is, Magran is one of the deities that exist within this world of Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. You interact with her most in Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, along with a lot of the other deities, but you do get to interact with her a little bit in the first Pillars of Eternity. Magran is technically her Adiran name. She's also known as, I think, Dicenus or Dakinis in Valian. She is the goddess of fire and war. But outside of just fire and war, she's also the goddess of consumption, transformation, purification, and trials. Magran is often depicted as a fierce woman, often looking like a fire godlike kind of character. So, picture your your Avowed godlike character, but with flames and obsidian, rock, and sparks, and lava and all that. Black teeth and heavy plated armor with a great sword. I've done an entire episode on Magranite if you're interested in learning more about her and the faith of people that follow her, and more about her personality, because one thing I like about the deities that exist within this world of Eora is that, it's not just Magranite is goddess of fire and war, so she's in charge of fire and war and trials and purification and whatnot. It's that these things, as far as I understand the lore anyways, these things are expressions of Magrane's personhood, her personality, her almost nature, if you will. There's something about fire, there's something about war, there's something about transformation and purification by trials that is emblematic of who Magranite even is. And there's this, I think, this idea of purification, which is something that I think we see in the Forge, which is a little more related to Abidon, mind you, but purification being something where you apply heat to, let's say, iron ore, and the dross, the stuff that's useless in that iron ore, will be melted away, and the only thing you're left with is the actual iron in there that you can then mold into a sword or something like that. So purification being the idea that you are burning away this, this dross that is within your person, which is thus making you a purer, better version of yourself, but, being burned, in this metaphorical sense is probably not a pleasant experience. And these are partly done through trials. And a consumption, I think, is all about being completely consumed by something, which is, I think, tied in with war, about we are dead set focused on this thing we are doing. We are being tactical, we are being clever, and we are being bold. And in fact, Magranites, the people who worship and follow Magran, are often known for their boldness and their quick wits. So as you can imagine, just hearing a lot about what this is, we can kind of lean in towards the roleplay of it. And you might actually kind of understand now why you should be playing or role-playing as a Magranite when you're playing Path of the Damned. And this is actually something I think I'd like to do in Avowed. Because Path of the Damned is supposed to be the penultimate challenge. It's supposed to be the most difficult challenge in the game. I mean, unless you're playing Pillars of Eternity and you're, doing the ultimate or something like that. I haven't seen a priest of Magran finish the ultimate yet, I'm just saying. But regardless, in Path of the Damned, it's supposed to be the ultimate challenge. It's supposed to be a trial. And I feel like because it is a huge challenge, I feel like because it is something that is meant to almost suck at certain points in time, that it actually makes sense that you roleplay as a Magranite to do it if you're really going to get in the world. Am I going a little over the top with this? Yes. But have I been talking about this world and thinking about it and writing about it for a few years? Yes. So I'm going to take it a little crazy, and we're just going to go along for the ride. Now, again, I'm going to lead more towards Avowed just because it's more recently out, and I think a lot of people have played a Magranite follower in Pillars of Eternity 1 to 2 to the point that it's been beaten to death. I don't think I'm going to say anything brand new there, but I think there's some interesting things that we can take from the game of Avowed, and particularly how you might want to build a character there. I find it interesting role-playing a character in Avowed because the options are so limited, but at the same time, Obsidian clearly put a little bit of everything so that you can kind of roleplay a character in one or two different ways. There's a way that you could roleplay as a ranger. There's a way that you could be almost like a paladin. And I think you could roleplay as a Magranite follower. It should come as no surprise that Magran's official symbol is a flame. It's a little flame in the shape of a spherical bomb. And because she is the goddess of fire and war, there are particular, weapons and armor that is associated with her. Particularly, it is firearms and I think swords. I can't remember exactly. There's particular weapons that you gain proficiency with in Pillars of Eternity for being someone that follows Magran, because a priest of Magran is an actual character class or subclass that you can choose in those games. And so there's already a character build in there, and if you ever want to have a guide on Avowed for what kind of character can I build, you can follow that. But that being said, a priest character in Pillars of Eternity is going to be a little bit different than a character you can make in Avowed, not because it's impossible, but because the priest characters, they tend to build in one kind of way. I mean, to be fair, in Pillars of Eternity, you can build a priest character any particular way you want. You could make them a tank if you want. I think when I say priest, though, our minds immediately go to the robed figure, and that is certainly appropriate for a Magranite, but you can also be someone in heavy plated armor. And again, to be fair, you can do either of those builds in Pillars of Eternity. I'm just going with what the default thought is when you think of that. But you can play a Priest of Magran from Pillars of Eternity, and we can transfer some of those ideas into Avowed. One such thing being that you have proficiency with firearms as well as swords. And so, kind of building your character into those arquebus weapons as well as some one-handed weapons in particular. And I'm going to get a little bit more into why I think would be a very kind of good way to build the combat focus of the character in Avowed. That way you have something that's close for melee, but you also have something long distance that's very lore friendly. And it makes sense from a fire and war perspective, the arquebus being kind of like the most modern technology that's developed in the Forge. It utilizes gunpowder, which explodes from fire, but at the same time, you are good in hand-to-hand combat. I think that it's a really good expression of what a Magranite father would be like in combat. As well, there's a little bit of lore about Magran, or at least a disciple of Magran, with a mace that we get later on in the game, so building into one-handed in Avowed kind of makes sense. Now, as far as the role-playing goes, we have a number of things that we can do when playing the game of Avowed. Now, if you're already not familiar, there are god totems within the game that you can select to use within the game of Avowed that you're like worshiping a god for, or you're like praying to a god to. I think you could be justified in picking any that you think benefits the statistics that you want, that raises the attributes of like might or something like that would be helpful for you. But I think from a role-playing perspective, it also would make sense to choose Galawain, or at least the totem associated with Galawain, because Galawain and Abaddon are two deities within the pantheon of Eora that are very much allied with Magran, and they're not only are they allied in like those people are allied, but also like their values are shared between the worshippers pretty regularly. And so I feel like out of the 4 god totems that you can get in Avowed, I think the one dedicated to Galawain, which unfortunately is the last one, is the most appropriate one to choose when you're building a Magranite-focused roleplay. But I think sticking with the Woodica one from the start also makes a lot of sense as well, but that's just kind of my 2 cents on the matter. In terms of the actual roleplay itself, we learn that Priests of Magran, because priests do have roleplay mechanics from Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, that they are favoring of aggressive and clever behavior, and they are condemning towards passionate or diplomatic behavior. And I think this is really telling of like what a Magranite person is like. They're aggressive and clever in the sense that they are not just these empty-minded war machines that just fight battles to fight battles. They're clever. They have a sense of wit about them. They have a sense of tact to themselves. But they're also aggressive. They don't stand idly by and wait for things to happen. They go after it. And I think we can do this in Avowed as well. It's real easy, I think, to kind of stand and like try at the sidelines and try to like make sure you get the most out of every quest, which is clever. That is true, but I think there's also something said about being aggressive and moving through the enemies and making those choices that are bold in that particular sense. So there's this balance of boldness and wit that I think is important. And at the same time, you want to avoid performing actions in the game of Avowed that are passionate or diplomatic. And I think that this is emblematic of a Magranite worshipper because passion kind of, I think, implies this spur of the moment to it, right? Like there's no forethought at all. I know that we want to be aggressive, we want to be bold, but at the same time, we don't want to be foolhardy, right? So you don't want to let your passions decide what's going to happen. You don't want to be so caught up in what you're feeling and thinking that you just act without thinking it through. And I think condemning diplomacy is because it kind of, not all diplomacy, obviously, but it kind of lacks that aggressive flair to it. I think being clever and aggressive and then not favoring passion and diplomacy is about what is right and wrong, or at least you're here to fulfill a purpose, which is what soldiers in war do. They have their orders and they're not really arguing with their superiors on what to do. And so I think that there's an aspect to diplomacy being viewed negatively from a Magranite that does make sense. I'm not saying that, soldiers in an army related to Magran would never engage in diplomacy, but I think it would have been tactfully done so. I think because diplomacy in this sense is almost looked at in a way of like compromising. It's not about achieving victory. It's about just ending the battle. I think Magran is more about achieving that victory. I think it's about going through the trial of this war and being transformed and consumed by it. Some other things that you consider when you're building your character in Avowed, there is a background for war hero that I think just makes the obvious most sense for the game, because war hero, goddess of fire and war, just, you can justify any of them. I just think that one makes the most flavorful sense. In terms of some items to use, there are a few that are pretty obvious. One is a pair of unique gloves called Magranite's Force. This gives you back 10 stamina, or it reduces your stamina cost while blocking. It also increases your fire damage. Like all unique items in this game, it comes with its own item description, and we can get some lore from these item descriptions, so we'll go through this in a second. It says, these heavy gauntlets are painfully hot to the touch, but so well insulated that a comfortable warmth is all that the wearer of these gauntlets feel from them. They were crafted by a master blacksmith and worshipper of Magranite as a self-made trial. When the gauntlets were finished, the smith put them on and plunged his hands into the fire of his furnace, muttering a prayer to Magranite to protect him from the flames. She heard the man's pleas and granted him the protection he sought, as the deep red color of the gauntlets deepened yet further, and they grew eternally hot. So there's a lot in here that I think it really matches the flavor of a Magranite follower. You have these gauntlets that are being used for armor, which is an instrument of war. They are hot to the touch, painfully so. And there's this idea, I think, of pain that is part of, undergoing trials and purification. But it's also just comfortably warm on the inside, because at the same time, you want this person to be focused on the battle that they're fighting. They were created by a master blacksmith and worshipper of Magranite as a self-made trial. And so there is this aspect that you are going to impose trials upon yourself if you are a follower of Magranite, such as starting the game in Path of the Damned mode, and then I think making a decision to, be, and I did this recently and I'm kind of regretting this. I am choosing to attack everything. Like, I am laying waste to the entirety of all the monsters and any combat that's available in Avowed, but I'm also playing on Path of the Damned. And there are times where I just want to skip combat because it's so hard, but it's a self-imposed trial. Anyone who tries to play Dark Souls games where they make up rules for themselves impose self-made trials like this. When the gauntlets are finished, the smith put them on and plunged his hand into the fire of his furnace. This is certainly nothing that is required by a Magranite follower to do something like this. This is just an expression of his worship, and that's just part of the flavor of being a Magranite follower. As far as weapons go, there's a unique mace called Battle Trance, which just thankfully happens to be one of the best weapons within the game. This one gives you power attacks that give you 15% attack speed and restore a small amount of health, and it also makes your ability cast speed faster. And the item description here talks about this war priest and disciple of Magranite who was Henrik Barabbas, and he was protecting Solace Keep from the assault of this rogue magfolk, and he single-handedly kept this creature at bay long enough that the Alia wardens were able to rally and destroy the mage folk, but he succumbed to his wounds, dying happily, though, knowing his life was a small price to pay for the safety of his home and people. And this weapon has been passed down from one Magranite war priest to the next, and potentially can get passed on to you if you're role-playing as a Magranite war priest in the game of Avowed. And I think that's rather fitting if you have been, because I think you get this weapon in the end of the game in the Galawain's Tusks, the last biome, so it's almost like a reward that you are finally made it. You're a war priest. Here's your Battle Trance mace, which again works out well if you've been speccing towards one-handed weapons. And I really like this idea of your player character, your envoy, who is a Magranite devotee, getting this weapon that has been passed down to different war priests dedicated to Magranite throughout the years. I just like the roleplay and the story of that. As far as armor goes, there's two pieces of armor that we can really look at, and I think it really comes down to which one do you want to wear, and then I think use the transmogrify option in the game to make it look like you're wearing the other one. That way you're kind of secretly wearing them both, but that's just my kind of way of getting around it. One is just exceptional plate armor. This is unfortunately not a unique piece of armor, so I would almost say make this the one that you're gonna just kind of transmogrify, and this is just because it has a stamp of Magranite upon it, or at least in the description, under the pauldrons, a smith has left the stamp in praise of Magranite. So there is supposedly, on just regular, exceptional plate armor in the game, there is a stamp of Magranite somewhere on that armor, and it makes sense that you would wear that kind of armor as that kind of character. But as I said, it is not unique armor, and I know we like to wear unique armor as characters in these games, don't we? So there is a unique set of body armor, but it's light armor rather than this heavier armor. So kind of decide which one you want to go with, and this one's called Threads of the Faithful. This one lets you and your companions slowly regenerate up to half health, and you also and your companions deal 10% more damage. They were originally worn by a devoted scholar priest of Magranite who possessed strange and unnatural abilities to read from and speak directly to the minds of other living beings. Nobody knows who this person's name is, but we know the name of their town, which was Xianao, which is not a place that we've ever been to in any of these games, but it's just now mentioned in the lore that this is where this Magranite scholar priest came from, and they had this weird ability to speak into other people's minds. This town was an epicenter for a strange, unexplainable event that ended with the disappearance of every living inhabitant save for this one scholar priest. Some believed their souls lived on in this person. Some believed that he became a strange amalgamation of all the people who once inhabited Xianao. And I feel like Xianao sounds like Xianu or something, which is... I can't remember what that is. It's a reference to something. I can't think of it while recording. That's so frustrating. But anyways, yeah, while almost certainly a tall tale, stranger things have been known to happen within the world of Eora. And that's not me just saying that. That's literally in the actual item description for this item, Threads of the Faithful. And so these robes were theoretically worn by this Magranite priest. You could justify that your character maybe knows the legend of this person from Xianao, and that you actually you would want to own these things. And so if you're wanting some unique armor and you're okay with it being light armor in a Path of the Damned run, then consider wearing this. The plate armor is really that it has a stamp on it, in the Magranite symbol. So there you go. If you don't really want to wear any of those things, then I would recommend just kind of building your character around a lot of fire damage, because Magranite and fire obviously are tied hand in hand, and you can build a pretty powerful fire mage in this game, which I think would lend credibility to wearing the Threads of the Faithful, this unique armor, because it reduces your essence cost necessary to cast fire-based magic. So having firearms and having one-handed armor, and either going into heavy or light armor mixed in with some fire magic, exclusively fire magic, maybe not playing around with much else, I think you could develop a pretty interesting Avowed character, and role-playing that character that is aggressive and clever, but not spur-of-the-moment passionate or settling for a half-victory diplomatic. Whether or not you stay a Aderan loyal or not, I think can be up to you, the player character, although personally, I think being an Aderan loyalist makes the most sense. Perhaps a Steel Garrote convert, but Aderan loyalist to me just makes a little more sense. But hey, if you think differently, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. Let me know why you think I'm wrong.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
That's everything I have for today's episode. I'm going to conclude this lore section before we close off the episode with a reading from excerpts from the Sermon of Struggle, which is a book from Pillars of Eternity dedicated to the deity of Magranite. Choice is a luxury we earn through peace. Struggle is our fundamental nature. Even when our war banners sit idle, mankind foments strife. Friends argue with fists, lovers kindle jealousies, merchants compete with lies. Wherever mankind goes, struggle follows. Magranite is a goddess of fire and war, not bloodshed and conquest, though many in Rayed Saris would tell it differently. How bitter they must be that Magranite's priests were able to destroy a god made manifest. How bitter indeed. We who worship Magranite are not addled barbarians or cloistered mystics. We are soldiers, armorers, watchmen, and bodyguards, artisans of conflict, and protectors of our families and flags. We do not salivate for battle. We view war as unwelcome, but struggle is our fundamental nature. We do not pray for strife. We pray for the wisdom to resolve it quickly. We do not wish for war, but when it inevitably must be fought, we find divine ecstasy in discipline, efficiency, and excellence. Magranite, guide us to the battle, that this is just and fair. Let us be your fire that burns away the profane, leaving only the righteous. If struggle is our fundamental nature, let victory be our inevitable state of grace. I don't know if I'm supposed to say amen at the end of that or something, but whatever. Anyway, so yeah, there's a little lore flavor for you. A lot of lore in there. I'm not going to go over it. But if you're interested in what Rayed Saris is, feel free to look up my episode on Rayed Saris or any of the history of the Deerwood, which is a lot earlier in this podcast life. But yeah, that's everything for today's episode. Thanks everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Not much else to report on. Usually I talk about what I've been playing, but I've mostly just been playing Grounded 2, continuing to play that. Although I have fallen off the deep end for tabletop role-playing games. I recently I don't know if anyone else does this. I get a paycheck and I save a lot of my money. I don't really splurge. I don't really spend a lot. But then when I do spend money, it happens in these big bursts. And I bought so many tabletop role-playing games. I discovered the game of Cairn, which is a really rules-light role-playing game. And I absolutely loved that I could get both the player's guide and the game master's guide, which is called the warden's guide, for less than, I think, $10 before shipping. And I'm just like, that's amazing. It's such great value. And you know what? Technically, it's actually all free online. You can get all of it for free online. The whole thing, not just the rules. You can get everything for free for Karen online like that. And I thought that was great. And then I started looking into other things that were really affordable, and I found a lot of other cool games I like. And it was like, oh, this one's $5, this one's $10 here and there. And before I knew it, I spent a lot. Let's just say that. I spent a lot of money on a lot of games I'm probably never going to get the chance to play, but whatever. I'm currently focusing on developing a Fallout tabletop role-playing game for my table. I'm going to start working on a Cairn tabletop role-playing game. And then I have a new crew at my newer job that also want to start playing Dungeons & Dragons again. So I might actually start developing a Pillars of Eternity / Avowed game. It's just a tabletop role-playing game set in the world of Eora. And I think it'll be also really good for this podcast because I'll be doing a lot of research into specific things, and I can report some of that here and maybe give some advice or at least give my insights on the experience. And I think that would be something that would be fitting on this channel. If you disagree, let me know. worldofeora@gmail.com. You can also email me to ask a question or give me a comment or criticism or just start a conversation about this world or a game that you're playing. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do so at World of Eora. If you would love to support the show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/World of Eora. And I don't expect people to do that. I will continue to do this for free, but that is there for those of you who find value in this show and you just want to give back a little bit. If you do want to support the show, but you're not interested in doing so that way, please consider leaving a review or a rating or a comment or something on the platform that you're listening to. I know Spotify and Apple in particular do have ways of doing that, because not only does that give me feedback and I get to see what you guys think, it also tells the algorithm that, hey, people are engaging with this content, let's recommend it to others. And then others can engage with the content and support the show, and that would really help out in that regards. But other than that, you can just send an email and have a good conversation. I'd much rather just get to know the people that are listening to the show and what you like about it and how you're doing and what you're playing and things like that. Other than that, that's everything for today's episode. Thanks everyone for your patience. I know I haven't been putting an episode out every week, and this kind of just seems to be the cadence that I'm at right now with work and personal life and other things like that. Thank you everyone for your continued correspondence and listening to the show. It's been great doing this over the years, and I hope to continue to do this for a while. Yeah. That's everything. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.